I know. I'm late to the game on this. I'm so late to the game on this. But you guys, I finally finished The Fall of the House of Usher. So last night, I finished the last episode of The Fall of the House of Usher. I remember being super excited about this show when it was announced because I had recently seen Midnight Mass, which I absolutely loved. I'm going to add the caveat that I have not seen his other two series, the Haunting of Hill House and something about Bly Manor or what. I have not seen those. I started watching Hill House, but I only got maybe one episode in, or not even a full episode. So the very first series of Mike Flanagan's that I saw was Midnight Mass, and I just, oh my gosh, that show was just fantastic. And I don't know if it was just that it hit me at the right time in my life or what in the world it was, but I had so much appreciation for that show. And after having seen The Fall of the House of Usher, did I enjoy this as much as or more than Midnight Mass? No, I didn't. That is not really because this show wasn't good, because it was good. By the time I finished it, I appreciated it more than when I began watching it. The main reason why this show was not as enjoyable to me as Midnight Mass is primarily because most of the characters are so unlikable. And I get that that's the point. You're not really supposed to like these characters because most of them are just so repulsive. There were maybe 2 or 3 that were okay, but they're not really shown enough to feel fully invested in what's going on. So the main reason you're watching this story is to see the fall of the House of Usher, to see this family's destruction. And it's well deserved, obviously, but watching the fall of terrible people isn't necessarily enough to really draw me in, because it's kind of like a given. Oh, okay, this is good. They're getting their comeuppance, but whatever. That's the primary reason why I liked Midnight Mass more. There were more likable characters in Midnight Mass. I was pulling for more people. So that's just a personal thing. That's why I mentioned that the fact that I didn't enjoy this as much as Midnight Mass is not because this show is bad, because it's not. It's very masterfully written and it's acted very well. Mike Flanagan takes all these different elements of Edgar Allan Poe's works and he just weaves them in so seamlessly. I'm not an expert in Edgar Allan Poe, but even I could recognize the very blatant connections. But people who are real Poe aficionados would know all of the different ins and outs. And I've watched videos since finishing this last night that was talking about all the different character names and how they were associated with the different books, or not books, but like the different stories that he wrote. And of course, there was one full-length novel that he wrote, and the different characters that played in this show and how they were named after the different people in these works that he did. It was really cool. And also the way some of the stories played out in each episode was pretty much directly correlated with how different events played out in these different stories that Poe wrote. So if you're a fan of Poe, you will probably really dig this. I'm a fan of horror and suspense and thriller, and so those aspects of it did appeal to me. The premise of this show is it's primarily told in flashback. It starts off with Roderick Usher having a discussion with, oh gosh, what's his name? Dupont, if I'm pronouncing his name right, Augustine or Augie, whatever. He's a lawyer, and he's talking with this lawyer, and he's confessing to these different things. And the house that he's making this confession in used to be his childhood home, and it's old and decrepit, and there's creepy noises going on in the basement. So the story unfolds that way. We get these jumps back and forth in the past and then in the present, where Roderick Usher is telling these stories. And each episode tells a story or tells how the different characters or different people in the Usher family died. And one by one, his children are basically picked off, but in interesting ways, because it's made to look like something else, even though we as the viewer see what has happened, but an outside spectator looking on wouldn't wouldn't know because they're not seeing what we're seeing. So it was pretty interesting to see how that was crafted. And so throughout the course of this storytelling, we see Roderick and Madeline Usher, they're two twins, fraternal twins, obviously, and it's telling the story of their life and their rise to prominence as the head of this huge pharmaceutical industry or something like that. And Roderick Usher has had a crap ton of kids because he pretty much messed with anybody with a skirt on. And in direct contrast to the way his bio father had been, he is welcoming to all of his children, brings them into the family. And the story is basically showing us, giving us an examination of the impact this extreme wealth had on the various members of this family. Almost all of them were completely corrupted because of it. They abused their position because of it. And so this is what I mean when I say there's really not many characters in here that are likable. So yeah, you are basically just taking a front seat to watching the destruction of this family. I'm sure that by now many people have already watched this show, especially if you're fans of Mike Flanagan. So yeah, like I said, I am late to the game on this, but I don't know what it was that took me so long to watch. It's probably the exact same thing that I already mentioned. It was just the unlikability of the characters. And I think I just had in my mind a certain way that it was supposed to be. I had listened to this book about the Usher family, and it was written by, I think, Robert R. McCammon, but I might be incorrect. Anyway, it was excellent. And so I think in my brain, I was expecting that Flanagan's story was going to be sort of an adaptation of this book. I don't know why I thought that, but I was completely mistaken. It wasn't. And so it might be that that was also part of the reason why I just didn't get into this right away. There's also the added complication that I am distracted by so many different movies and shows. So I'm watching so much stuff, in addition to the fact that my day job keeps me busy. But whatever. So I had noted some things when I started watching it, and I continued to fill in the notes. Some things that I really liked about this. The audio processing of the dialogue. Oh my gosh. I loved, especially when Carla Gugino was talking. I could tell that there had been this processing on her voice because the way her consonants sounded at the end of her words, when you work in audio, you can hear these things. And so I knew that stuff had been done to it because I've heard that done to my own voice whenever I'm processing, or whenever I used to process my narration audio for audiobooks. For some reason, that was super pleasing to my ears. I loved that. I loved listening to the dialogue in my earbuds. So that was something that went into the pro category. Something else I also liked, I've already mentioned the acting. I really like Mark Hamill's voice. Now, I remember Simon was telling me that he couldn't take him seriously because, obviously he's doing voice work with the character, but I felt like it really fit the character and I liked it. I guess, Mark Hamill is a chameleon when it comes to his voice acting. And so he didn't sound like Mark Hamill. Mark Hamill to us sounds like, I guess, Luke Skywalker, but whatever. I remember before this show came out, I made some sort of comment. I don't remember if it was like maybe under a post that Mike Flanagan had made, but I indicated something about how much I was looking forward to this show, and Mark Hamill liked it. That was really unexpected. Anyway, so I had no idea what sort of character he was going to be playing in here, and he played he was something else. There were some comedic moments with him. He was the family's attorney, and so there was a funny scene in there that kind of made me chuckle where he's there advising the family member what they should or shouldn't say, and this particular family member kept just saying stuff that they shouldn't say, and he would say to the cops something about like, disregard that's off the record or something. I'm paraphrasing, but I remember that made me, I don't know. I thought that was funny. It was also interesting to see in here two of the actors from Reacher. The girl who plays the young version of Madeline Usher and the guy who plays the young version of Augustine Dupont or whatever, the detective guy. They had both been in the first season of Reacher, so that was nice to see them again. Also, the girl who played the granddaughter had played in Dr. Sleep. Mike Flanagan used many of the same actors that he has worked with in the past, including, as almost always, his wife, who played someone completely different than the type of person I'm used to seeing her portrayed as in the different things that she's in. But so that was interesting. Like I said, there were really only a handful of likable characters. One was the current wife of Roderick Usher. You don't really see a whole lot of her initially in the beginning, but as the show goes on, she's got a little bit more screen time, and that's when she really started to become more likable to me the more we got to know her. Also, the granddaughter, same thing. You don't really see a ton of her in the beginning, and then as the show goes on, you see a little bit more as her character becomes more important because of what's happening. And then there was the investigator, who's pretty much likable always from the beginning, but he's sort of like the audience, right? He's hearing this story being told to him. He's like the symbolic representation of us, the audience member. So he was likable. One of the earlier wives of Roderick Usher was likable. That's just a handful of characters. I counted the cast. There's 28 people in the cast. Well, not counting a lot of, like, maybe I guess the real minor side characters. There were 28 people listed on Wikipedia. And out of those 28, like, let's say only 4 were people that you could actually like. The granddaughter, the wife, Dupont, and the first wife. So yeah, that's not really a lot of people to like too much. Hold on. Sorry, my dog, who had to jump down, had to get back up in my lap. There were some minor cons that I did write down. I think I've gone through all the pros. I'm going to shift gears now and into the con category. They're not huge. They are not enough to make me say that I absolutely disliked this, because there's really not many of Mike Flanagan's things that I've seen that I've outright disliked. Maybe, what was that one? Oculus? I wasn't super crazy about Oculus, so maybe that one. But for the most part, I've liked everything of his that I've seen, including this. But there were some things, oh, there we go, another dog, watch her come back in. There were some things that I wrote down as sort of cons. One was they got a little bit something inaccurate on some of the history. There's, I think specifically what I'm referring to here is there's a comment made about, do you think Reagan's going to run? And the time frame that particular line of dialogue took place in, I don't think that was accurate, because he had already announced more than a month earlier that he was going to be running. So that was minor. That's minor. Another thing, it was that from the very beginning, I noticed there was a certain demographic of people that was overrepresented, or there's also a term that I saw called outsized visibility. There was an outsized visibility of a particular demographic, and that was something that was pretty apparent from the very first episode on. It's not something that's like a huge part of the story, but it was just something superficial about these characters that I couldn't help but notice that there was definitely an overrepresentation going on. There was a quote that someone said about this. I think it might have been Spooky Astronauts. She said that this show had mostly unlikable characters and so less heartstrings to pull on. I did list this as a con, even though, as I've already indicated, I think that's the whole point of this show. You're not supposed to like these characters. So it's probably a little unfair to call that a con. I call it a con for me because I want to have some sort of emotional investment in the characters, and I really didn't, because I didn't like almost all of them, except for, like, let's say those 4 that I listed. So that was a little bit of an issue to me. Take that with a grain of salt, though, because different things appeal to different people, and that might not be an issue at all to most of you. There was something else that happened where one of the characters, maybe I'm just brain farting and forgot something, but there's a scene where one of the characters removes a fake set of bangs, and I didn't understand what was the point of that. It might have been because it was something I saw this person do when I picked back up with watching it, and it had been a few months since I'd seen it, so maybe there was some sort of reference as to what the heck that was about, but that made me like, what? And then also there's a sort of monologue that one of the characters gives. It's Madeline, and she gives this monologue at the end, as things are coming to a head and it's looking pretty dire for her and Roderick. And she gives this little speech, this little soapboxy speech, making all of these strange, I don't know, it almost felt like talking point or narrative type of arguments about different things going on in society. To me, it didn't really feel like it fit with her character, because these things that she blathered on about didn't really seem like something that her character would be super interested in or even give a crap about. But the way she says all these things, it's like we're supposed to believe that she really does think this deeply and about these different subject matters. And I just couldn't help but thinking, well, but her character doesn't really give a crap about anybody but herself and her own ambitions. We're supposed to really buy that she is sincere about these things that she's saying. So that part kind of came off to me as a bit hollow, not ringing true to her character. Maybe that was intentional. Maybe it was just because the situation that her character was in at that particular moment and trying to make justifications for her actions. It's very possible. I could have just misread what was really going on. And then the final thing that was a con to me, and this is probably the biggest con out of all of them. It's not major, but it is enough that kind of made me feel like the ending fell pretty flat, because there's an action that Roderick takes at the end involving his sister, and it didn't make any sense to me. It felt kind of stupid. And so like this action that he takes involving his sister, when it comes to a head at the very, very end, it just felt almost comical and ridiculous. And it felt like, okay, we need to make this particular event happen, so let's do this thing so that this can happen. But it didn't fit. Like, it didn't fit as well as all of the other things that went on in these episodes, which made complete sense. And it just flowed very well. This particular moment was probably the only one out of all of the episodes, or out of all of the big climaxes that happened at the end of each episode. This was probably the only one that felt like this weird bump in the road that just wasn't a proper jigsaw piece fitting into place. And I literally rolled my eyes when I saw this particular thing happen. I was like, this makes no sense and this is stupid. I really wish it had been written differently. I'm not sure how it could have been written differently that would have worked. I just know that the way this thing happened didn't work for me. And I understand the reason why this particular event was going on. I'm trying to be vague for those who haven't seen it. And for those who have, maybe if you have sort of a different viewpoint or can add some clarification, even if you add clarification, I still might not really buy into it, but it might be that there's something I'm missing here. I do understand the connections that are being made with events that happened in the first episode, but it doesn't work for me. And that was really the main thing in this whole story that didn't work for me, despite all these other, well, the fact that there's unlikable characters. But like I said, it might be a little unfair to call that a con. That's just a personal thing with me. But this event, out of all of the things that happen, is probably the biggest problem for me. It's not really enough to hold this back from being as good in my eyes as Midnight Mass. That's mostly because just the stuff I've already touched on. So that's not what's keeping it from reaching the heights of the level of appreciation I had for Midnight Mass. But it was certainly enough to make me notice it and not really be a huge fan of it. But the very final scene that happened, the closing shot with Carla Gugino's character, was pretty fantastic. I actually liked that, and how all of these things just came around to each character that's being mentioned. Felt like that was really well done, and the final closing shot of the Raven was really, really cool. So yeah, if you haven't seen this yet, and if you're a fan of Mike Flanagan, if you're a fan of Edgar Allan Poe, I do highly recommend this. Despite any of the cons that I've said, this is a well-crafted story, and Mike Flanagan, in my opinion, is just continuing to demonstrate what an excellent storyteller he is in the horror genre, because he's able to take horror and he's able to just give it such depth. And despite the fact that there were issues with the characters that I had, there is this depth to the story that he's giving us that really grounds it and keeps you coming back for more and wanting to see what's going to happen with these characters. Where's the story going to go? And I really felt that with Midnight Mass. I did feel that same thing with The Fall of the House of Usher, even though I didn't like the characters. I have been hearing nothing but excellent things about The Haunting of Hill House. So what I'm going to try to do is go back and watch the Bly Manor one as well. Really looking forward to whatever he has in store for us in the future, because he's definitely a director that has cemented his name in my brain. There are so many different things that I've seen from all sorts of different directors, and when they start to consistently produce solid work that appeals to me, I start to notice their names, and it does start to burn itself into my brain, and Mike Flanagan is one of those directors for sure. So yeah, that's all I can think to say about The Fall of the House of Usher. It is currently on Netflix. I'm assuming it will always be on Netflix, but then I thought that about the Marvel shows that had been on Netflix before Disney took them. So whatever, it's on Netflix right now. So if you get a chance to check it out, let me know what you think. If you've already seen it, let me know what you think. Also, give me your input about these different things, specifically those final moments at the end of the last episode that just didn't really sit well with me. I'd really like to hear your thoughts on how you felt it wrapped up, if you felt like it was perfect or if you felt like it was lacking, like I did. But anyway, definitely worth a watch. Thumbs up for this one. And that's all I have to say. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Bye.